Noloco has a powerful workflow system that allows you to automate anything to do with your Noloco data. In fact, you can think of it as a mini Zapier or Make that's baked right into the application to allow you to automate your business. Hi, I'm Dan Lehman from AutomationHelpers.com, and we're a Noloco implementation partner. If you haven't gotten started with Noloco, you can do so using the affiliate link in the description below. You can navigate to the workflows area by looking at your left-hand navigation and clicking on the lightning bolt icon. You can create a new workflow by clicking this plus button, and you're going to choose the table within Noloco that this is going to originate from. So let's click on the contacts table, and you can see that we have a few different triggers to choose from. We can choose based on when a contacts record is created, updated, deleted, or we can run it on demand with an action button. When we add a new action, you can see we have a lot of different options to choose from. Some things that are notification based, like sending emails or push notifications. We've got creating, updating, deleting records. We've got some conditionality that we can have on our items. We can loop through items in a list, add comments. We can use ChatGPT, send notifications to Slack, and we can even do more complex things if we want to use Zapier or Make in the mix. For our first example, let's set up a notification together. So we have this running on the opportunities table, and we're doing this based on an update. Now, instead of running on every single update, we can tell it, hey, specifically, we want you to look at this when the field value changes for our status property. Now, the reason we're doing this is it's better for performance reasons. If we're suddenly running it on every single update we make and we're making a ton of updates, that's not quite as performant. So let's go ahead and keep that limited to looking at that status field to change. And then we're adding an action here. This is where we're saying, hey, if the status field, so we can choose fields either from the triggering record, which again, remember is the opportunity in this case, or we can do it from the user, the person who's actually updating this record. But based on here, we can choose different fields, and we're looking at the status field. So if the status field is equal to, and sometimes by default, this turns on dynamic value here, so you could pull in different attributes from the triggering record. But in this case, we're just saying, hey, if that status has changed to close one, so we want to turn off the dynamic value, and then we're just plugging in the actual status itself. If it's equal to closed one, then we're going to proceed with another action. And then finally down here, we can configure a push notification. You could use Slack or different methods of communication like email. But in this case, we'll use a push notification within the application itself. We can choose an icon that we want to have. And then in this case, we're plugging in a message. And this is using a combination both of static text that we're typing, as well as choosing fields that we have within the opportunity itself. Now, we could include a link here as well if we want to redirect the user back to a certain part of the application. And then we want to make sure that we send it to the correct user. So in this case, we're going based on the trigger, and then we've got our different relationships here. So we're going off of the owner. At this point, we've built our workflow. We can click done if we want to collapse these and have it be a little bit more visual here so that we don't have to scroll through as much text. And the other thing that's really cool about this is that we can test these workflows that we've built without having to actually simulate it in our data. So for example, rather than me actually navigating to the opportunities screen and then changing the value and saving that record, instead we can click on the three little dots up here and we can test the workflow, so we can do it directly within the workflow builder UI, which is super helpful. So in this case, I'm going to choose a record to test. We're going to use this website refresh, and then we can click the test button, and this processes it. Notice in the upper right-hand corner, now I get that notification. So instead of navigating back and forth and making a whole bunch of extra test records, then we can see how this appears so that we are good to go with our workflow. Now, if you seem to encounter issues with your workflow in production, another nice feature that we have is being able to see a history of our different runs. So you can see that in this workflow, we had 2 runs that completed successfully, and we have 1 that failed. And by clicking on this, we can actually see the data from that run. So we can see the first time this executed, it failed. I was able to make changes to my workflow so it could run successfully. Next, let's take a look at a workflow with a little bit more complexity. So in this case, when we have an interaction that's tracked, maybe we had a meeting that we had with a prospect or a client, we want to be able to send some sort of automated follow-up to this. So for our trigger, we're going to actually run this on demand with an action button as opposed to having it kick off from a create or update of a record. If I go into the app editor, I can click on my buttons, take a look at these record buttons. So in this case, we have a follow-up. Notice how this hovers on any single one of these interaction records that we have. And when we click that button, we want that to then trigger said workflow that we have. So if we open this up, we can see that we have this follow-up. We can actually run more than one action if we wanted to here. But in this case, we're saying run an on-demand workflow, and then we're able to choose that workflow. So we're using that send demo follow-up. And that happens to be the name of the workflow that we've built. So that's how we actually connect the button press to the workflow that we're keying up. For this first action, we're going to send some information to ChatGPT. We're not using Make or Zapier as a middleware. This is a direct integration. Now for this step, you do need to be able to have your own ChatGPT API key. So here we're sending information. This is kind of like that previous step where we're using both static data as well as dynamic data in this step. If you click here, one of the things that's really interesting about choosing this data is, in this case, our trigger is from that interactions record, but we also want information to come from the opportunity itself. So what's really cool is that if we have data from the opportunity, because the opportunity is linked to that interaction, we can actually click and drill in a level deeper and be able to pull information from multiple steps away. So I can choose fields that are on my opportunity. This is really powerful. So you're not restricted to just that triggering record itself. Now, in our next step, when we get that response back, we want to update that interaction record. And what's really cool about this is that in our process of workflows, when we have different actions, we can use those actions to be able to take data from other steps that we have and populate that data. So for example, in the previous step, when we sent our data to ChatGPT, we get a response back, and we want to be able to use that response in future steps. So in this action that we have where we want to update the record with our interactions record, we're choosing the record that triggered this in the first place. Now we want to update the fields with the response. And you can see, hey, we can use data from the trigger, we can use data from the user, but in this case, we're actually using data from step one, the response from ChatGPT, and that's where we're plugging this in. So this is just a field that we're updating, and we're sending that information from the response to update that field. So now we can actually open up the record to see what this looks like. And we can see that we sent this data to ChatGPT. We took that response back and we updated this follow-up draft field. So this has what we could presumably send to the person over email. We could copy and paste this. We could go send an email directly. We have lots of different options, but this is essentially what we did in those first couple of actions. Now from here, maybe we want to send a notification to our sales team. And so another action that we have is sending a Slack message to a channel. Here we can plug in, again, data from the opportunity or what we received back. You'll notice here that we can construct our own link. So we sent a link back to Noloco, and we're concatenating the identifier for this so that someone could actually open up that record directly. So in this case, in Slack itself, we can see when we have this triggered that we've got our little notification message here. We've got the Noloco icon, and then we have this link down below to actually open up that record. And this, because of concatenating that link, is able to take us to that specific interaction which triggered this in the first place. Now, you might have certain instances where you want to use this in conjunction with Zapier or Make, because maybe there's a lot of different applications that you want to connect your data with. There's really great functionality both in Make and in Zapier to be able to have webhooks. This is essentially a custom URL that we set up, and you get to copy and paste that URL, and we take that and we plug it back into what we have here for our action. If I scroll down, you can paste this value in. So essentially you're saying, hey, I've got some kind of trigger in Noloco, I've got this data, and now I want to send some of that information over to Make or Zapier. So we could say, hey, take that information we had in the previous step, and from that, we want to create a new Google Doc, and we can open this up in Google Drive. So that's something that you couldn't do natively purely with Noloco. That's where it's a perfect use case to use Make or Zapier with it. But this allows us to be able to extend on those really powerful automation capabilities that we have already with Noloco's workflows. And it's really easy here to be able to add our own query parameters and send data from the different steps that we have here. So if you want to send the name of the account or the name of the opportunity, that's all things that we can do by concatenating that together as part of our webhook. Hopefully you can see just how powerful Noloco is with its workflows and actions. If you have any questions about setting up Noloco, don't hesitate to reach out to our website at automationhelpers.com, where we're offering free 30-minute consultations.